Mr. Fuel, either drop by off in room 812 or email. Attention NHS members. Juniors interested in running for an officer position should submit an application in Canvas. All NHS members need to complete the questionnaire in Canvas to help us prepare for the induction ceremony. Contact Ms. Patton for help with your hours. Multiple sclerosis is a progressive immune-mediated disorder. That means the system is designed to keep your body healthy, mistakenly attacks parts of your body that are vital to everyday function. The protective coverings of your nerve cells are damaged, which leads to diminished function in the brain and spinal cord. Medical treatment can help, but there is no cure for this disease. Today, there are over 1 million Americans battling MS. Starting today, NHS members will be collecting donations during all lunches to help raise awareness and funds for the MS walk. Stop by the table to donate your spare change. This is Miranda. This is Sam. Have a marvelous Monday.
Marvelous Monday indeed. So today, like I said, we're talking about the Cold War. It's going to be one of the last big PowerPoints we do in this class. Luckily, this one I think is pretty interesting. For 40, 50 years, we hate the Soviets, aka Russia. They hate us. And really, even though it's us two countries that are the primary rivals, it affects everybody else because during those years, we are by far the two most powerful nations that there are. So everybody's kind of sort of got to pick sides. And it just shapes just about everything that we get involved in. As always, if you see something in red, it is worth writing down. I'm going to ask some questions, but obviously if you have questions as we go, let me know. We'll work on the PowerPoint. Got some videos to go with it today, tomorrow, and I guess Wednesday for you guys. Thursday, y'all are taking the STAR test, correct? Wednesday, the remote kids are. So mainly this is for the remote kids, but it's going to be the same lesson both days, Wednesday and Thursday. Moral of the story is when you guys do your STAR, you're not going to be missing anything because you will have got that information on Wednesday. Friday, we will wrap it up, and then we're getting close to the very end of new content. Grades coming up tonight before midnight. Notebook check number 2 is due. You got the list back there of what you need. It's also in Canvas. The link is active. If you haven't turned it in yet, please get it in before midnight tonight. It's a daily grade, but remember, it will average together with your first notebook check for your second to last test grade. So really important you get that stuff in. If you haven't turned in the first notebook check, obviously you need to do that as well. This week and kind of moving forward, we got a couple more grades, and that's pretty much it for the 6 weeks. On Friday, I've got another extra credit opportunity for you, which is due. It's another one of those historical documentary review essays. This time, the documentary you choose, it needs to be something related to the years 1900 to the present. So lots of cool stuff you can watch, but you watch your 30-minute documentary, you write a short essay based on the rubric, you could get 15 extra points on test grade and an extra 100 for a daily grade. This is going to be due on Friday before midnight. I usually give you a little bit more time, but we're going to have another extra credit quiz next week, and I don't want them to overlap too much. So not something that's mandatory, but check your grades. If you're not where you want to be, by all means, get it done. It's easy. Finally, last grade of the 6 weeks, last test grade of the 6 weeks. Hate to say it, we are going to have another DBQ essay, this time dealing with the unit we're on, Unit 8, so 20th century stuff, Cold War, World War, stuff like that. I'm going to open it up probably Wednesday night, and that'll give you Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and even Monday night to get this thing in. Same setup as last time. You got your DBQ. I'm going to give you an hour, on the timer to get it done. Just, do your best. Be original. Don't Google a bunch of crap. Don't go try to find sample essays. That's lame, and it's getting easier and easier to spot. So man, just do your best. I would encourage you not to even use notes. This is one of, if not the last full-blown essay we're going to do in here before we start reviewing. So yeah, give it your all. Try not to use your notes. Try to make it as similar of conditions as you can to that of the AP test. AP test is coming up, guys. Little bit over a month. And we're about to finish new material and get solid into review mode. So, you know, you really want to try to be accomplishing everything that we do if you can without notes. I think that it's good training. But that'll be due on Monday. That's going to be your last test grade for the 6 weeks. Get it in on time. The way that I have the rubric structured, as long as you turn it in on time and you do halfway decent, I will try to give you a decent grade. It's not going to be anything that'll kill you. Hopefully it's something that you can help you with, especially, you know, with all the extra credit opportunities we have coming up. So I'm trying to think if that's pretty much it. Kind of give you, you know, the direction we're going. Not a whole lot of grades left. So like I said, try to do everything well we have left, turn it in on time. And if you're missing anything, all that stuff is open for now. Get that in as soon as possible. So without further ado, let's get to the Cold War, USA versus the USSR. Cold War is kind of a weird term. Why do we use this term? Why do we call this conflict with the Soviet Union the Cold War rather than, I don't know, something a little bit more violent, something a little bit more action-packed?
It wasn't necessarily like actual like conflict, but it was like this.
I like that. Let's say a friend of yours, I don't know, steals a video game, or you hear that they talk crap about you. You might give them the cold shoulder. I don't want to talk to you. Stay away from me. We're not friends anymore. Okay? It's not something so bad that you go over and you punch them in the face, but it's bad enough to where it's like, you know what? Whatever. You talk crap about them. You make them look stupid, but you don't really want to fight. That's what it was for about 50 years between the United States, who guys, we are the most powerful nation in the world after World War II, in the Soviet Union. They're kind of creeping up, and eventually they're going to be kind of number two. For 50 years, we hate them. They hate us. We do all sorts of things to undermine each other, make each other look bad. We come really close to fighting a few times, but we never actually fought against them directly. Now, that being said, were there any wars fought between World War II and, I don't know, the early 1990s? Yeah, there were wars fought. And even though we didn't directly fight the Soviets in a lot of those wars, okay, we would be backing one side, the Soviets would be backing the other. So we're fighting each other without ever really fighting each other. I think in your, I don't know if this was in there. Yeah, it wasn't in your vocab yet, but we're going to talk about surrogate wars or proxy wars, where we kind of fought against Soviet interests, sometimes directly, sometimes through intermediaries, but we never actually fought them directly. Again, that's why it's called the Cold War. It's a 50-year period where everybody thinks we're eventually going to fight. We're talking a bunch of smack to each other. We're doing things to make each other very angry, but we never actually fight. And it's a good thing that we didn't, because after a while, once they have nuclear weapons and we had nuclear weapons, I mean, it was a situation where no one was going to win anyway. So that's what we're going to talk about. I think it's pretty interesting stuff. Like I said, the last really big PowerPoint we're going to do in this class, but I'm telling you, it ties to just about everything else in the 20th century. And a lot of what we're talking about is actually going to be really good prep work for next year in U.S. history, when you guys are going to spend much more time on this. Because, like I said, almost everything after World War II in the 20th century that we're involved in has to do with the Cold War. So last week you had these terms, these names, just some basic definitions you had to do, some reading you had to do. If you didn't do the reading, obviously still do that. But if you missed some of the vocab, we're going to talk about 1 through 5 today. So go ahead and add that to your notes from last week. Again, these notes are the last notes that need to be in your notebook check. What we're doing for the rest of it, you know, you do need some PowerPoint notes, you know, over this PowerPoint in general for our next notebook check, but these definitions are part of the notebook check tonight. So like I said, if you don't have them down, please get them down. So as this relationship all kind of starts to strain, well, you got to understand a few things about World War II. Originally, Stalin and Hitler were kind of cool. They didn't like each other. But, you know, Hitler especially saw that he didn't want to wage war on the rest of Europe and have to worry about the Soviets coming in from the east. So they signed that non-aggression pact in 1939. Hitler invades Poland from the west. Stalin does it from the east. And for a little while, you know, the Soviets aren't involved in World War II. But then Hitler, being evil, breaks his deal. He attacks the USSR. And now Stalin is waging a war against Hitler. And if you recall, I mean, Stalin loses more troops than anybody by far. Definitely makes them fierce enemies. Stalin sees that he needs help to defeat the Germans. That's when Stalin officially switches sides, joins the Allies with Great Britain and France and a few others. Once the United States gets involved directly after Pearl Harbor, I mean, those are the big three Allied nations: the Soviets, the British, in the United States. Before the end of World War II, Churchill, you know, Prime Minister of Great Britain, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, President of the United States, and of course Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union met several times. There was the Tehran Conference, the Yalta Conference, the Potsdam Conference. In the early ones, you know, like Tehran, it was all about, you know, how are we going to win this war? And the Soviets, you know, they were really kind of pushing for us and the British to invade from the West. I mean, they needed D-Day more than anybody, okay? But they also, you know, knew that they had competing interests. And then as the war progressed, you know, it was more, okay, we need to come up with a plan for after the war. Now, Roosevelt, later Truman, because Roosevelt dies, and Churchill got along. Okay, they had very similar viewpoints about how the world should be. Stalin had other viewpoints. So it took a lot of negotiation. But essentially, throughout these three conferences, this is the game plan for after the war ends, things that they all agreed on. First, got to get the United Nations up and running. Everybody recognized that the League of Nations after World War I wasn't necessarily a bad idea, but the reality, it just didn't have the follow through that was necessary. Countries like the United States never even joined. There was no real official power for them to do much of anything. They could just kind of make recommendations. So all three were on board on, hey, let's kind of be the founding members of the United Nations. Let's make sure that the World War III doesn't happen again. Okay, they all sign on the dotted line. Next, there's Germany. Germany got blamed for World War I, and then Hitler came in and he started violating the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. But I mean, you know, Germany's the primary aggressor in World War I and World War II. Who's to say that just because they're defeated today, tomorrow they're not going to get back up and running and try to attack us again? So we agree we're going to stay in Germany for a while. Okay, we're going to help them get back on their feet because we knew that the economic depression in part led to Hitler coming to power. But we're going to occupy it for a while to make sure that they don't ever try to attack us again. Since Stalin and his forces were already occupying Eastern Germany, and, you know, the United States and Great Britain primarily were already occupying the West, we decided to divide up control of Germany, at least temporarily, into four parts. The U.S. get a part to kind of help out and monitor, the British get a part, the French get a part, and then the Soviet Union gets the eastern part. And the idea, get them back on their feet, make sure they're not up to any good, eventually leave. Stalin was in Eastern Europe, okay? His armies controlled the East. And we were worried about that. I mean, we were worried that he's just going to take it over and just fold it right into the Soviet Union. And we didn't want that. We already knew Stalin was a bad guy. We already did not like communism. So we said, hey, Stalin, once things settle down, and once you kind of help them recover and we help the West recover, you have to allow free elections in Eastern Europe. You have to give those Eastern European countries self-determination. Okay, if they want to be cool with you, whatever. If they want to be democracies, whatever. You got to give them the ability to choose. And Stalin, you know, was like, well, okay, I guess I'll do that. Russia, you know, in exchange for all this, they're going to help us, you know, once Germany's defeated. Once Germany's defeated, they're going to help us fight Japan. Stalin goes back on pretty much all this almost immediately. The first two, yeah, that's fine. but he never allows free elections in Eastern Europe. He basically creates what we call puppet governments there. Okay, they're also called satellite nations. They're the same thing. Okay, satellite nations, thinking like, these Eastern European countries are evolving around the Soviet Union, this much more powerful, prominent force. Or puppet governments think Stalin's the puppet master, and yeah, people maybe get to vote there in these Eastern European countries, but they're going to vote for the one person who's running, who basically works for Stalin. So Stalin kind of breaks with a lot of these as soon as he can, and we did some shady stuff too. I'm not saying we didn't, but it was very clear, even before the war was really over, that we were going to have problems with the Soviets. They were going to have problems with us. So the animosity's there, but we all know we got to wrap up World War II and kind of get back to business before we can really focus on each other. The roots of the Cold War lay in the competing ideological systems of Western democracy and Soviet communism. Now, I don't know why this is blacked out, this bar on top, but what it should say is like the West, being the United States and Western Europe, and then Soviet Union on the right-hand side. Originally, I was going to have you copy this down more or less, but then I remembered in one of your notes a while back when you were doing decolonization, you had a chart that was really similar to this. It just kind of added in fascism. So you don't have to copy this, but if you hear something that you think is important, let me know. So in the left-hand column, we're going to talk about the United States and our allies and how we run politics and individual rights and economics. And on the right-hand side is kind of a comparison. It's how the Soviets view things. We are a democracy. We are capitalists. They are a dictatorship. They are communists. Those ideologies are incompatible. And they're almost polar opposites in all regards. So all the things that we value, that we feel are super important, that we think, hey, this is the way things should be, they believe more or less in the opposite. And the problem is we think our way is the best and we want to spread our ideals. We want more people to be like us. They feel the same way. They want to spread their ideas. They want more people to be like them. So conflict, guys, just because we're so different, it was inevitable. So let's talk about politics. Citizens, in the West, United States, Western Europe in general, elected representatives, national leaders. The people had the right to form their own political parties. Soviet Union, not so much. They were a totalitarian dictatorship controlled by Communist Party leaders. The Communist Party was the only political party allowed to operate. So even when they had elections, in the Soviet Union or in these communist Eastern European countries, you may only have one person to vote for, or there might be somebody else on there, but everybody knows don't vote for that guy, you'll get shot. So a lot of their kind of attempts at representation, they were a farce, and everybody knew it. Okay, complete opposite ends of the spectrum. As far as individual rights, citizens, in the West typically have some basic fundamental freedoms. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. Over in the Soviet Union, ordinary citizens had very few rights. The government controlled all the media, so they ran the television, radio, newspaper. Nothing was getting printed or put out there that hadn't already been approved by the government. The people there only read and saw what the government wanted them to see and read. Sorry. Yeah, think about how weird that is, how manipulative that is. Because they didn't have the internet back then. Soviet citizens didn't have a whole lot of freedom of travel outside the Soviet Union. So their knowledge of the outside world, especially like in the 50s and 60s and stuff, somewhat limited. All right, you see communist countries to some extent still try to do that, especially like North Korea. Although, technology is so widespread, even people in North Korea aren't as closed off and unknowledgeable about the outside world as they once were. But back then, the Soviets say, hey, the evil Americans, this is the most prosperous country on earth. You guys got it great. Who's to say any different? And if you did say any different, you got shot in the head or you just disappeared. Maybe you're brought out to one of those gulags out in eastern Russia, Siberia, and you're essentially a slave out there. So again, people didn't speak out against the government. They didn't have the freedom to criticize the government, especially under Stalin. That's one of the things he was so notorious for, those purges, having people killed that were even perceived to have different ideas. The secret police in the Soviet Union arrested all critics of the government. And also with religion, most communists are atheists. Now, today, like Cuba is different because Cuba is very thoroughly Roman Catholic. It was so ingrained in their culture that part gets kind of ignored. But most communist regimes are atheists because they don't want you to put anything above the state. The government's what you should be loyal to. The country is what you should be loyal to, not so much to your own personal religious beliefs. Economics, obviously, way different. In the West, economic freedom allowed people and corporations to own land, to own businesses. Businesses provided goods and services in order to make a profit. Businesses competed with each other. Under capitalism in general, we all kind of compete for the money, and theoretically, if you work harder, you can do better than someone else. Okay, that's the good thing. The bad thing is there is always going to be economic inequality. The communists said, no, we don't want economic inequality, and it's not about you, it's about all of us. It's about the whole. It's individual ambition versus collective ambition. In the Soviet Union, most forms of private property were abolished. The state owned, most of the property. They planned economic incentives and motivations. They controlled all the means of production. You guys read about and we talked about Stalin's 5-year plans, where he focused heavily on industrialization. And on one hand, that worked, but a lot of people starved to death in the process. But that's okay. Sacrifices are needed sometimes for the greater good. And that's kind of one of the many flaws in communism. Private farms became state-owned collective farms. We'll talk about tomorrow China when they become communist. They do a lot of the same things. We believe our way of life is the best. They believe their ideas of life are the best, and we both want to spread those ideas. We emerged from World War II as the most powerful country. They're creeping up right behind us as number 2. And it's kind of like, the 2 toughest kids at school. Everybody assumes eventually they're going to fight. So it's 50 years of us getting ready to fight, us getting close to fighting, us fighting through other people, but we never actually fight them themselves. That's why it's called the Cold War. Anybody ever seen Rocky 4? Okay, it's I don't know if it's my favorite Rocky, but it's the funniest. For those of you who don't know, Rocky, at this point, it's part 4, so he'd been around for a while. He's the underdog boxer, Sylvester Stallone. And in comes this monster, Ivan Drago. He's like a foot taller, and he's literally killing people in the ring, kills his buddy Apollo. It's just a big mess. And they agree to fight, and they'll only agree to do it in Russia. And when you see them training, because all the Rocky movies have a training montage, man, they put him in some crappy cabin out in the woods, no equipment, no nothing. And Rocky's there training for the fight, running up mountains and lifting up his family in a cart and doing all this cool stuff. And Drago's in the gym and he's doing steroids and he's just a cheater. And at the end, Rocky, of course, perseveres and everybody sees, Russia sucks and America's awesome. Kind of propaganda. Guys, this came out during the Cold War. This is early 80s, which was the tail end, but still kind of the peak of hatred, really. And even, growing up as a kid in the 80s, man, the bad guys were always the Russians. Like every action movie, it's the Russians. Guys, that's how widespread the animosity was. It seeped into every facet of our culture. We competed with them in everything you can imagine. The only reason we went to the moon, because, other than getting there, what's there to do? Nothing. The only reason we went to the moon is we were afraid they were going to get there first. So a lot of the things that you see during the 20th century, a lot of our motivations for just about everything, one of the reasons we were so into the Olympics back then, we didn't want to lose to them in anything. That's how widespread it was. So 40, 50 years of animosity that really bleeds over into everything else. And even countries not directly involved kind of needed to pick a side because we're the 2 most powerful countries in the world. So this is happening. We know it's happening. Everybody assumes we're going to fight eventually. What are our goals? What are we trying to accomplish during this 40, 50 years? Well, here's the basics. First, especially in the late 40s and 50s and even in the 60s, We want to promote open markets for U.S. goods to prevent another depression. We saw the economic depression had at least in part led to World War II. We knew that Europe and Asia were just messed up and they weren't going to be making anything for a long time. This was an opportunity for the United States to make a lot of money. Okay, people were going to rely on us for all their manufactured goods, at least for a while. That's good for us. So we wanted open markets. We wanted people that were willing to buy, our exported goods, make us money, help them out as well. It's a win-win. We wanted to promote democracy throughout the world, especially in Asia and Africa. Remember, decolonization is happening at the same time. More new countries are being created than ever before in history. We sure as heck want them to be more like us than like them. But the biggest one, and this is the one that really kind of, it's the big envelope that almost everything else we do during those years fits into, is our policy of containment. And this was some vocab the other day. Guys, we realized that the Soviet Union, they were communist. And by just association, Eastern Europe was as well, because Stalin was never going to leave Eastern Europe. Okay, that sucks. We hate communism. But if we can keep it there, like cancer, keep it from spreading, well, we're doing a good job. As long as it doesn't spread outside that territory, not that big of a deal. So everything that we do over the next 40, 50 years is usually tied to containment or containing the spread of communism. We see it as an illness. Let's stop it dead in its tracks. As long as it stays where it is and doesn't go anywhere else, we're going to be okay. That's why we fight in the Korean War. That's why we fight in the Vietnam War. That's why we do a lot of things that we do in the 20th century. It all ties to this containment. So that's what we want. That's kind of what we're working for. What are the Soviets working for on the other side? First, greater security and defensible borders. The Soviets lost more people in World War II than any other country, by far. Part of it's because they were fighting the Nazis directly for a really long time, way before we got involved. But also Stalin was willing to sacrifice the lives of millions, in order to ultimately win. Because to him, again, it's all about the collective, the country. It's not all about you. So if a few million people got to die, but we win anyway, well, I guess that's okay. Stalin had seen what happened when the Soviets, had to defend their territory pretty quickly against the German Nazis, okay? They attacked out of nowhere. It was a surprise. And because they were already in Poland, it wasn't hard for them to get into the Soviet Union pretty quick. He fears the United States with their nuclear weapons. He fears the West. He doesn't want another attack to come. And if it does come, he wants to be able to better defend his borders. That's why he doesn't leave Eastern Europe. Okay, that's why he establishes puppet governments in Eastern Europe, people that work for him. Puppet governments and satellite nations are the same things. If, the West, the United States, the British, the French, if they want to attack the Soviet Union this time around, they're going to have to march through all that territory, all of Eastern Europe, before they can really get to us. And since those countries work for us, it's going to slow them down, it's going to weaken them, and then we can come in for the kill shot. Okay, so he's got a strategy. He wants to make it a lot harder to defend, or a lot harder for them to get past their defenses. Okay, this is going to help him out. But he also, this is the first step in him spreading communist ideology. Again, communists, and even going back to like Karl Marx and Engels, kind of the forefathers of communism, they didn't see communism as like a limited thing. They saw this as a global revolution. They saw workers rising up all over the globe, and this being kind of the way things were going to be. So, yeah, Stalin wanted the ideals of communism to spread. He wanted people to kind of convert to his way of seeing things. So that was a real goal, just like us stopping that was a real goal. In the years following World War II, it's pretty obvious Europe is divided. In the West, you got democracy. In the East, you got dictatorship. That's where the term Iron Curtain comes from. It is that imaginary dividing line in Europe between the free West and the not so free East. Churchill's pictured here because he's the guy that came up with the term. He gave this big speech, talking about, the oppression in the East and the freedom in the West, probably trying to make himself look good. But still, that's where the term comes, the Iron Curtain. It's more of a metaphor than anything else. There was never a big wall that divided all of Europe. Now, we'll talk about the Berlin Wall. There was a real wall in Berlin that divided that city, and it is very similar. It's kind of the physical manifestation of the Iron Curtain. But in reality, I mean, there was no real wall, but it was that imaginary dividing line. Communists over here, people that favor democracy over here. So the Cold War was fought in a variety of ways. Like I said, we never directly fight the Soviets, but we did a lot of things to tick them off, and they did the same things to us. So what were the major strategies? Here they are. I'm going to put them all up, and then I'll talk about them one by one. First one, brinkmanship, which is a fancy way of saying playing chicken. Okay, everybody's seen the old movies where you got a car over here and a car over there, and they drive right towards each other. And whoever's the chicken is the one who swerves. I mean, you could get in a collision, but you're probably both going to die, so somebody's going to swerve, right? That's what brinkmanship is. Let's take it to the edge. Let's make them think that we are down to go to war at any time. Let's take it about as far as we can without actually fighting, and then step back a little bit, hoping that they blink first. They were doing it. We were doing it. Okay, it's not just us doing this stuff. Both sides participated equally in this. So brinkmanship, let's take it to the edge. We come really close to going to war with them a few times. Just thankfully never happened. The next, espionage. You guys know what that is? Espionage. It's a fancy way of saying spying on each other. Spies, it's not like James Bond in reality, but they're real. They exist. We're probably doing more spying today than we ever have in history because technologically it's just easier than it's been. But we use spies. They use spies. We tried to find each other's secrets. We tried to do things purposely to manipulate and mess up the plans of each other. Okay, espionage was one of the biggest weapons. Foreign aid. Hey, all these new countries in Africa, here's a bunch of money. Oh, well, thank you. Why do you think we're giving so many people money? And they did it too, to a lesser degree, but why would we go to a newly created country? Hey, Indonesia, you're your own thing now. Here's a few $1 billion. Here's a bunch of food. Here's some weapons. Why would we do that?
Like, also be a democracy.
Make them a democracy. And yeah, that was a real goal, but also just get them on our side of things, You give somebody $1 billion or $1 million or $10. I mean, okay, well, this guy's pretty cool. I'll listen to what they have to say. We gave out a bunch of foreign aid. They did too, to a lesser degree. But the whole idea is, if a war's coming, we need more and more people on our side. And plus, we don't want them to become communists, so maybe they will look at things from our point of view. Obviously, you have alliances. The two big ones were NATO, which is still around, and the Warsaw Pact, which was, the Soviets and some of their allies. Just in case. Propaganda, just like World War II. I mean, World War I, we put out things to make them look bad. They put out things to make us look bad. Again, the fact that all the bad guys in all the movies I ever saw growing up were Russians, it says something, okay? We were always trying to undermine them, and they were doing the same for us. And finally, you got surrogate wars, a.k.a. proxy wars. We don't fight them directly, but we do fight. Sometimes it's just through and with other people. Sometimes you're just fighting against their interests rather than them directly. But a lot of wars were fought. A lot. A lot of assassinations were carried out. A lot of really under-the-radar kind of shady stuff. Again, man, the Cold War affects just about everything else. Now, this next slide's more stuff for U.S. history, so I'm just going to fly through it. But just a little bit about what things were like here in our country. People were paranoid. They thought communists were ever. A senator named Joseph McCarthy came on TV and said he had the names of like 50, 60 confirmed communists that worked in our government. Turns out it was all crap, but that's what he said. There were various red scares where people thought communists were everywhere. They're working in our companies, they're working in our government, they're working in movies, trying to convert the masses to their ideology. The House on Un-American Activities Committee. This was a congressional committee that was formed to try to root out communists living in the United States. People lost their jobs, they were blacklisted, really messed up stuff. People had to sign loyalty oaths, really proclaiming in writing, their adherence to American values. Growing up, especially in the 50s, 60s, a lot of houses had bomb shelters. Because, guys, the attitude was, at least for a while, not if we're going to have a nuclear war, when we're going to have a nuclear war. I mean, that's really how it was for many years, especially like the 50s and 60s. That 20-year period, it was like, hey, when's it going to happen? It's going to happen. We all know it's going to happen. We just don't know when. Imagine being in school and instead of having a fire drill, the nuke's about to drop drill. They had those all the time. Again, crazy stuff. The foreign policy you do need to know. And you don't need to write it down, but just know it all has to do with containment. We'll talk about the Marshall Plan and Truman Doctrine today. We'll get into NATO and the domino theory a little bit later in the week. The moral of the story is just about everything we did in our dealings with other countries related to that idea. Stop the growth of communism. Don't kill it. You don't got to kill it, but don't let it grow anymore. So let's talk about the Truman Doctrine. If you did your vocab last week, you don't need to write this down. If you didn't, you might want to write this down. So how does it start? 1947, the British are helping people in Greece and Turkey. There are communist groups in those two countries that are trying to essentially move those countries towards being communist. Okay? The British were the first to help, but the British could only provide so much assistance because, again, they were kind of in some rough shape after World War II. So they call on good old US of A. That is when our president, still President Truman at that point, issues this doctrine. America promised it would support free countries to help fight communism. Greece and Turkey got a lot of money from us, a lot of guns from us, a lot of supplies from us, and they were able to root out the communists there. This is the beginning of the Truman Doctrine, which kind of carries on almost perpetually. But the Truman Doctrine was significant because it showed that America, the most powerful democratic country in the world, was prepared to resist the spread of communism throughout the world. If you aren't a communist and communists are bothering you, call us up and we'll help. Now, on one hand, pretty cool. We're going to help people, fight against these communists, which are oppressive. On the other hand, it meant we helped sometimes people that hey, they weren't communists, but they were still dictators. They were still, authoritarian. To us, we felt that communism was the greater evil. So we got into relationships with some pretty shady characters ourselves, people that were doing really bad things. Even terrorist organizations sometimes, which we'll get to that later. But yeah, it was good and bad. As long as you weren't a communist, we'd help you out. But some of those people weren't any better than the communists. The Marshall Plan takes this a little bit further. We're almost done. We don't have much left. 1947, U.S. Secretary of State Marshall, remember he was the guy that was in charge of the Manhattan Project. He'd gotten a promotion by then. Announced the Marshall Plan. This was a massive economic aid plan for Europe to help it recover from the damage caused by the war. There were two motives for this. Helping Europe to recover economically would provide markets for American goods, so benefiting American industry. Prosperous Europe would also be better able to resist the spread of communism. It's probably the main motive. So basically, we tell the leaders of these European nations, not just West Europe, all of Europe, you want some money? Here you go. Guys, we rebuilt Western Europe. We did. Okay? This was our economic aid package to them. We knew that, if the economy really goes down the dumps in these places, communism is always appealing to people that are struggling. So we couldn't let that happen. Plus, we're buying a bunch of allies in the process. So we give away all this money. We help rebuild Western Europe. We offer the money to the leaders in Eastern Europe, but they turn us down because Mr. Joe Stalin, he wasn't going to let them accept it. He helped them a little bit, but not nearly to the degree that we helped the West. So the first big boiling point that gets us close to fighting happens in Germany. Let's talk about that, and then we can get to this quick. It'll be something we can get done quick. There's not hardly anything to write down. Germany, remember, we decided we're going to occupy for a while. Okay, and at the beginning, right after the war, the French had a portion they controlled, the British had a portion they controlled, the Americans had a portion, and then the eastern half went to the Soviets. The idea is stick around, occupy the territory, help them get back on their feet, but also make sure they're not up to no good. 1948, those three Western-controlled halves, the American zone, the French zone, the British zone, we decided, you know what, we're just going to join together. Okay, the Marshall Plan went into effect in the West. They were starting to do pretty well for themselves. Those zones joined together. They formed a new country of West Germany. When I was a kid, there was no Germany. It was West Germany and East Germany. The West is doing good. They want the East to join. I'm sure people living in the East wanted to join, but that's Stalin's territory, and he's ticked off about this. So he says, no, you're not going to join. Now, the weird thing was, and I think this is on the last slide, so hold on. The city of Berlin was actually entirely in the Soviet zone, but it was kind of like jointly controlled by all the allies. Like Americans could go to Berlin. Kind of hard to get there, but you could get there. And the city itself was kind of split into two. The western part of the city was kind of ours. The eastern part of the city was theirs. So we're all supposed to have access to it. But now Stalin's ticked off that the West is doing so well. So he just decides, you know what? Berlin's mine. Nobody's coming in anymore. It's in my territory. So he basically blocks off Berlin. Says, you're not going to get anything from the West anymore. You're all mine. We could have went to war over this, but we didn't, okay? Because we just want to push to the brink. So we launched an operation known as the Berlin Airlift in response to this blockade. We start dropping care packages, essentially. Here's food, here's water. He was hoping he could kind of basically starve the West into submission because remember, people in Western Berlin, they're on our side, and it didn't work. We start sending in the planes knowing that if he shoots one down, we're going to war. He don't want to go to war, so he doesn't do it. It's a show of force that ultimately backfires. Eventually, he lifts the blockade. Things go back to normal in Berlin. The eastern half is still communist. The western half is still like us. But this is the first time we get close to fighting. Berlin's going to be a hot button topic later. Eventually, they're going to build a wall in Berlin, physically dividing the city. But we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. So everyone sees that things are getting tenser. Then our biggest fear comes true. Our whole goal up to this point, stop the spread of communism. And thus far, it hadn't really spread. We've been successful. 1949, China becomes the second communist nation in the world. Now, this isn't some little nation like Greece. China's the fourth largest nation on earth. It already at that point had by far the largest population. It's looking like containment's failed. And communism in China under the first leader of what is now the People's Republic of China, it's not very good. The leader was a guy named Mao Zedong. We're going to talk about him tomorrow. We'll spend the first part of class kind of talking about communism there and how it worked out and how it didn't really work out. It was really, really bad. And then we'll move on to, more and more rising tensions between the West and the East. On Wednesday, We should be talking about like Vietnam and stuff by Wednesday. Thursday, you guys will be doing STAR. Do not have anything to make up from Thursday's class. We should be able to finish up the PowerPoint. I'll have a few video clips here and there. I've actually got one we're going to watch tomorrow, Open Milestone. It's pretty interesting. But my goal is to finish this PowerPoint this week. Ideally, you probably want to wait to write the essay until we're done with the PowerPoint. You can start early. I mean, you'll have enough to where you should be able to write it. But I think the more well-informed you are, obviously, the better it'll be. But I'm going to leave that up to you. I do want to open it up on Wednesday, probably Wednesday evening. That way, if you want to get it done early, you certainly can. But remember that DBQS is going to be due Monday. That's going to be the last major grade or any grade of this 6 weeks. The extra credit documentary review is due on Friday before midnight. But even more pressing, notebook check number 2 due tonight. So please get that in. And obviously, if you need anything, let me know.